parking ordinances. This is Irving Place. This is, right here is Woodland, oh, that's, Inman, yeah. I got a ticket there 2 weeks ago, yeah, $60, just for picking up a slice of pizza, strawberry. Because I do this sort of thing, I went to the ordinance. Yeah. And when I amended the parking regs, yeah, I don't know, in the last year or two, yeah, they struck all the requirements and replaced them with new ones. Yeah, for developmental, yeah. They were on-street parking regs, so you can't park between here and here and that side. Oh, yeah. They never put new ones back for anybody. Oh, really? Yeah, that's the test. Yes, it's not adversarial, but listen, I think they need to fix that. I'm trying to think when I don't remember striking. They struck a lot of requirements, so we introduced most of them just slightly different. How many did it? It was no more than 2 or 3 years ago. Oh, maybe like 3+ years ago. Before, because I've been here 3 years, 2 months. It was a 3 or 4 ordinance. So traced back. All right. You see what the judge says. The judge is $60. $60 is a big ticket for 90 seconds apart. Were you otherwise parked illegally? I was parked in the yellow stripe. Oh, that's terrible. Not sure what that means. There's also no sign to tell me what that means. I guess you're supposed to know the curve isn't painted. But it's yellow stripe. I know right there. Yeah. Oh, we did do in a little convertible. It was actually kind of crazy how fast I got tipping. Yeah, it was. I think a lot of it to see it. I'll have to look at that. We did do some revisions, yes, because we paid the avenue in that period. We changed parking on that area. I think you have a lawless road rate now. What name was that? Oh, you did? You found them? I've never gotten a ticket of photo. You give a bit of that. Morgan handicap spaces is a big one. I just he was parking it was yellow stripe. There's no sign that says you're not far. No. We don't stripe places like that. We don't stripe stuff like that, so I'm not really sure what that. No, but so you gotta strike them. You know you're not supposed to, but you think when you pull in, you will not. Yeah, they sound not. Does it sound similar to them? Is there something that is solely to judge? Who's that? In Buffalo, the bottom of it, so it's I know they're doing they did a pilot program where they were like sending people like a friendly you, but we're not finding, you know? Yeah, no, that's not so friendly. But where they have road parking utilities, just cars on. Oh, yeah. So what happens? They scan your plate there, where they go. I love it. We just got nice talking. We're not a better job all the time. And you go see in Jersey, they're not moving, right? They're not like being like it's being right, but like you can't be able to trust each other. What is the only thing there's that I'm very surprised at them. Look at that part. It moves pretty quick. And what part of little black living on the edge here, I know. Yeah. But that's because the structures will go down on the way here, coming down 78 in the rain. That car's no trash. It's like useless on the rain. It's good for parking over. You street parker in the block. Where's the reason? Yes. So they have the garage attached to the building, which feels like it's about to collapse. He is the one that they like to. Oh, that's because of the Christians. Yeah. So we'll see on my parking tickets and you'll soon make it work. You gotta still put it for this. Pretty close like a building control. Yeah, all that. But I don't think for the Margaret and you. She's very great. She's really good. It's about that thing. Only one thing's on. Still, it is, that's a hard one. It might be listed somewhere here. Or I can,
She's over there.
I can write it down.
She's here, right?
Yeah, she's right
Okay,
there.
yeah.
How's it going? Was that a nickname? You
It's
just
a
call her,
bell,
right? You
right?
could just call her Isabella.
We'll see.
Just have to put something up in the ground here. Thank you again for doing the Roosevelt Park
Oh, yeah.
brochures, and I think that actually diffused quite a bit of.
What's that?
I think it diffused quite a bit of concern, people wondering what the hell I was doing.
No, they didn't even ask you that. Just tell me.
Oh, yeah, they're all very tenants.
But just to do feedback is the simplicity and to maintain to do an application, or it's all by the no reservation. Should though you all right, you, yeah. But she, I mean, it should be pretty smooth. It's the whole basement. When, yeah, first preservation plan. Yeah. We'll talk about that. I'll have that question. Yeah.
Bella, there's Isabella, Oyuwella, Bison. You could just call her Isabella. That's easier. It's no problem. We'll see. All right. And so. Talk with Jared.
We had it?
Of course.
Oh, okay, since we had that one star. Oh, okay. So we're gonna have another one just by the dates and like.
Yeah, there's steps. Later, July. Make sure she has the notes.
Is there anything that you should
You don't need to do anything. It's so little test of thing.
That's. All connected. So they will do again. As you discuss, should we conduct?
Should be that.
I just want to make sure that I know it's when we do the meetings.
Go back to the summer.
And is that done in how many times?
Minimum ordinance.
this special meeting, votes for the special second meeting on the ballot. I guess it's, I think it's. Yeah, we can, yeah. We got. Yeah. And so, it's a lot of. That's not safe. Yeah. It's like, it's change the lots. You need to do, you assume, so I mean, like, that. It just goes, hello. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Daniel Wright, and I serve as the chair of the Maplewood Historic Preservation Commission.
I want to welcome you to tonight's community workshop about historic preservation and the possible formation of an historic district in the Ridgewood Road neighborhood. I also want for joining by Zoom. For anyone who cannot attend tonight, if you have neighbors who wanted to come but couldn't make it, the meeting is being recorded. It's being streamed live and recorded, and we'll post it online afterwards. The purpose of tonight's meeting is simple: to share information, answer questions, and listen. No decisions are being made tonight. This is not a hearing, and it is not a vote. It is an opportunity for residents, especially property owners who may be affected, to better understand what historic district designation can mean and what it would not mean, and how the process works. We know that the idea of an historic district can raise very practical questions. What happens if I need to replace my roof? What if I want new windows? What about an addition, solar panels, a driveway, a fence, or routine maintenance? What would require Historic Preservation Commission review? What would be exempt? What kinds of applications can be handled quickly? These are exactly the kinds of questions that tonight's workshop is meant to address. We also know that Ridgewood Road is not a museum. It is a living neighborhood made up of homes, families, changing needs, and individual property owners. Historic preservation at its best is not about freezing a neighborhood in time. It's about preserving the character and history that make the place special while managing change in a thoughtful, fair, and predictable way. Tonight, we want to explain the potential designation process clearly, what has happened so far, what steps would come next, and where public input fits in, and how residents can continue to participate. We want you to leave with a better understanding of the process and with confidence that your questions and concerns are being heard. To help guide us through this discussion, I'm pleased to introduce our consultants, Stephen Smolin and Isabel Ayuela Orzon of Architectural Heritage Consultants. They bring deep experience in historic preservation, architectural survey work, and community-based designation processes. They've been helping the commission evaluate the Ridgewood Road area and understand its architectural and historic significance. And tonight, they'll walk us through what potential designation could mean in practical terms for homeowners. After their presentation, we'll make time for questions and comments. We encourage you to share your perspectives. So whether you are enthusiastic, uncertain, skeptical, or just trying to understand what this means for your home, we are glad you are here. So again, thank you for taking time to be a part of this conversation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen and Isabel.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Okay, good evening, everyone. Stephen Smolin with Architectural Heritage Consultants. Like Daniel said, this is a follow-up meeting to the one we held back in December. And just quickly to take a show of hands in the room here, how many of you were with us back in December for that meeting? Okay, so about half of the people. And then also, how many of you live on Ridgewood, Baker, Highland, or Everett? Just about everybody. Okay, so you're in the right place. So like Daniel said, Architectural Heritage Consultants has helped many communities across New Jersey. We're headquartered out of Hoboken, and we've worked with towns from Glen Ridge here in Essex County, all the way down to Cape May, help with preservation plans, design guidelines, and other materials that historic preservations need to succeed. We will start tonight with a brief recap of the December meeting. Then we will focus on what designation means in very practical terms, how the review process would work with the HPC, how common projects would be reviewed by the HPC, and then we'll end with next steps and some questions and comments. The goal is not to answer every single possible project scenario in this presentation. This is going to be general common projects. If you have a specific project in mind, I would be more than happy to talk about that with you after, and I can probably give you a pretty good sense as to how that might go. So the goal of tonight is to help everyone understand what this potential designation of the Ridgewood Road Historic District would mean. Ridgewood Road, by the way, was surveyed back in 2006. This is a 400 or 500 page survey document that was produced from that effort. And it does include Baker, Highland, and Everett. So we're going to focus on three basic questions tonight. First, what would change for property owners? Second, what would not change, stay the exact same? And third, how would common projects on the outside of your home be reviewed? And like Daniel said, being in a historic district does not shrink wrap your house in place. That is not at all the intent of this effort. This creates a review process for certain exterior changes, primarily additions, new construction, demolition, really big changes to the neighborhood, and have those be considered in relation to the historic character of not only that property, but the broader district, such as the streetscape. So I will turn these next couple slides over to Isabel.
You can see I'm much shorter than Stephen. Thank you again for having us. And I am happy to see familiar faces from the December meeting. This next part that I'm going to go through is for those of you who were not there at that meeting, just a quick recap of what we spoke about, and also go over why Ridgewood Road in particular is the focus of consideration for a district. So back in December, one of the most important things that came away from that initial community meeting were a discussion about the benefits, so opinions on what those might be from your fellow community members and neighbors, but also a series of concerns. So the strongest benefits that people identified as a potential benefit of making a district here is, of course, the neighborhood character and being able to collectively celebrate that through a review process. We also heard interest in the stability of property values that can come from creating a historic district, and that consistent, a little bit more consistency and ability to review big changes that might happen in an area, predictable approvals as part of that. And also we heard that people were interested in the benefit of having the HPC provide guidance on how a neighborhood might evolve or specific properties might evolve. Some of the main concerns, and this will be some of the major topics that we cover tonight, are concerns about time and cost, the flexibility in material choices, some uncertainty about the process, if there is an HPC review process, what that might mean, your property rights, and whether designation might make future projects or home sales more difficult. So tonight, those key concerns, Stephen and I are going to try to address, and then we'll have that questions portion at the end of the meeting to further discuss too. So moving forward, starting from the beginning, why Ridgewood Road? Why is it significant? And the most important reason is that it is a corridor which records through its architecture the long story of Maplewood's development and history. Starting at the earliest times of the 1700s, when it was the home of Asher Biederand, the painter. And then through the 1800s, when more houses, more homes on this road began to develop, including vernacular and Victorian era homes, and that signifies the period when Maplewood starts to transition from a rural community into a more connected suburban place. This is an example of some of those homes that many of them actually still exist today as they were, with some upgrades like electricity, you know. Then in the 1900s, that brought the strongest visible pattern that's present on Ridgewood Road today, and it's the commuter suburban development with the colonial revival style houses, the Tudor revival homes, and other early 20th century houses that now create the cohesive streetscape people associate today with Ridgewood Road. All of these different periods, when you have a chance at the end of the presentation, there are some posters we printed out. The one in particular that's vertical, it shows when that property was created from the 1700s all the way to the present. And you'll see that it's a wonderful mix across all these periods, but a great majority of these properties are still from at least the 1930s and before. So the significance of this road is not just one house or one architectural style. It's particularly interesting because of that combination from the early settlement through the 19th century growth and into the 20th century suburban development, including those houses that are a little bit more recent. So what I'm showing here, the red outline, again, this is printed out in the back. I know it's a little hard to see exactly. That is the proposed district around Ridgewood Road, and it also is the area that was defined in that 2006 survey. So one of the key things, as I mentioned, is, you know, this is the historical road that records through its architecture all these different periods of growth in Maplewood. It also is a road and includes many properties that still maintain their integrity. So, you know, they haven't changed so much that it's unrecognizable from the period that they were made, as well as what we call in our discipline, prominence. So this road is still an important gateway into Maplewood and has been since the 1700s. And lastly, the kind of key factual part of why this makes sense is because all of these properties have already been surveyed professionally back in that 2006 document. So they all have a record of each building and property's history and whether or not it has been changed or when it was changed, periods like that. So that document from 2006 is always the very first step in creating a historic district. And so the outline of this was defined during that period. And we didn't make any changes to it. So the next section that I also want to recap from our conversation in December, very also kind of quickly, and Stephen's going to go into much more detail related to this, but what does designation of historic district at the local level mean? So presently in Maplewood today, there are 12 individual properties that are locally designated. So with these 12 locally designated landmarks, from the Timothy Ball House and the Duran Hayden House to the Women's Club Municipal Building, these landmarks show a strong commitment to the heritage of Ridgewood, of the area, but also Ridgewood Road. And they're also the landmarks and the locations that are currently reviewed by your HPC. So if something significant on the exterior is to change in any of these properties, it goes through that review process, and it can't just happen overnight without professional input and assessment on what it would mean. Now, there are no districts that are locally designated in Maplewood currently. So what that would change is anything within that boundary that I showed you, it would in the future, potentially, if it goes through, right, be reviewed by your HPC. So the things that would go through an HPC review are if there are any exterior changes that affect the appearance of the building. Any major works, that's, additions that would affect, of course, the exterior and the relationship to the street and the surrounding areas, that would go through an HPC approval. Demolition of any new construction would also go through review. New construction, so if there's an empty lot currently and somebody wants to build a new thing there, that would also go through review for its appropriateness in the area. It would not, however, change zoning. So zoning, that determines what is the height of the building that's allowed there. How much of a building can we build on that lot? Those things are determined by the zoning board and would continue to do so, or to be under there. So it does not affect the zoning. It has no say over what happens on the interior of any building in a historic district. It doesn't affect paint colors. It has no say over landscaping, and that also includes, fences on the property. Those are considered landscape features that are not part of an HPC review, and any ordinary maintenance for the upkeep of the home. I'll also go through some examples of projects later, and it might help expand on these two columns too. So the biggest change really is that if a house or a property is in this HPC district, it would go through a review process. And there are different types of review processes. So Stephen's going to talk through what that would mean, because some things are super quick and they should be able to just, let people know, yeah, it's not going to be something that needs more major review, go ahead. Other things will go through more and be discussed amongst the HPC. So I'll pass it back to him to talk through this, because this is the biggest change that would happen from a district. Thanks.
Okay, now I'm going to explain how common projects will be reviewed in a potential local historic district. So Maplewood has had a historic preservation commission for about 25 years. They're actually coming up on the 25th anniversary in about 2 weeks. It was established way back in 2001. It operates under what's called municipal land use law. That's a state law in New Jersey. And there's about 150 or 180 other HPCs amongst the 500 or so municipalities in New Jersey. Maplewood is also a certified local government municipality. That's a very special designation given to about 4 dozen HPCs throughout New Jersey. And it essentially unlocks additional federal funding for the Historic Preservation Commission to undertake different planning projects. The HPC is composed of 9 members. They're all volunteers. They come from Maplewood, 7 regular members, 2 alternates, and they have a secretary and administrative officer. Those members need to meet certain qualifications. So architects like myself, perfect fits for historic preservation commissions, also contractors, people familiar with local history. Those are the types of qualifications that you would find on the Historic Preservation Commission. And they're of course open to new members. And if anyone's interested in joining, you should definitely talk to the chair at the end of this meeting. It would be great to have a couple more people from Ridgewood Road be part of the commission as well, of course. So the Historic Preservation Commission has an ordinance already. It's 271-73 is the beginning of the ordinance. This is available on the township website already, and the ordinance itself is remaining intact. That's not being changed, and that's out there and in effect right now. So that has 3 different applications that the HPCs can consider. The first is a minor application. This is for small, limited work, roof replacements, other in-kind replacements, wood siding, putting wood siding on. Those go through a minor application process, and I'll talk about exactly what that means in a moment. The second type of application is called a major application. Those are for more substantial exterior work. That's your additions, replacement of like all the windows on a house would be considered a major application. Things that really change the exterior architectural appearance of the house. The last kind of application, probably the most significant that any historic district could have, would be a full total demolition application. Demolition is inherently permanent. Like I said, it's a very dramatic thing to have happen in a historic district, and that's a separate type of application. So the minor application for smaller work is an expedited process. You're not coming to a hearing. You don't need to present to the commission. It's literally done over email. The chair takes a look at it, and you're on your way. Typically, this process happens in a matter of days, but certainly within 2 weeks. I am the Historic Preservation Officer in Glen Ridge, and I can tell you that we handle these all the time there. There are 1,400 houses within the Glen Ridge Historic District, so my email is quite busy, and I typically get back to people in just a day or two when it comes to minor applications. The second type of application is a major application, and this is, again, for more substantive, big work like an addition on the side of your house. And this would involve submitting an application, attending a meeting in front of the Historic Preservation Commission, and you get an answer within 45 days from when you submitted that application, if not sooner. The third type of application, full demolition, follows a similar process to a regular application, but there's additional noticing requirements to make sure that the neighborhood is aware that something that substantial may occur. That's also subject to the 45-day timeline. So for submitting a major application for putting an addition on your house, for example, speaking from experience, it is possible to submit a complete and clear application up front and not need to amend it, and the HPC can consider it very swiftly. There needs to be clear photos of what the existing condition is. You can simply just take those on your cell phone, a brief description of what the proposed work you're looking to do is. If it's involving like an addition, some information about the siding or the roofing that's being proposed. If it's generic products like asphalt shingles or wood siding, I think you can just say that. That doesn't take much explanation. Larger projects should be accompanied by drawings or marked up elevations to explain and convey the project. And it's great that the Maplewood HPC also offers an early informal review process if you have a particularly large or complex project that you want some initial pointers on. So the Maplewood HPC and many other HPCs all across the country follow what are called the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. These are created by the National Park Service. They've been in effect for about 5 or 6 decades, and they deal with 3 main principles. That character-defining features be retained when feasible, that elements be repaired rather than replaced when practical, and that new work, additions, new construction, match the fit, scale, materials, rhythm, and character of the house and the immediate streetscape. So retain, repair, and be compatible. The National Park Service also publishes what are called preservation briefs. HPCs also frequently rely on these for more technical guidance on specific topics. One that was recently updated a couple of years ago is related to substitute and imitative materials. This was modernized by the Park Service, mainly to acknowledge that since the standards were written in the 70s and 80s, the availability of high quality, appropriate composite materials for things like siding, roofing, windows are available, and in many cases can be used appropriately on a historic house. So this was a really big update that they did, It's a very detailed preservation brief, and many historic preservation commissions across the state and the country rely on this to judge whether or not composite materials, so not genuine historic materials, people looking to do cement board like hardy plank instead of wood, AZAC composite trim instead of wood, and rely on this document for a set of framework for when those composite materials may be appropriate. And in many cases, they are. So next, I will hand it back to Isabel to talk about three specific types of projects and what would be appropriate versus maybe not appropriate in front of the Historical Preservation Commission.
All right, so we're going to go through 3 different project examples. The first one is probably the most common that that people go through, and that's a window replacement. So if it's a historic window, the best outcome is the repair of those existing historic windows, but when it's feasible. It's also usually considered fine that if the units are deteriorated and they cannot be repaired, that they be completely replaced. And it's advised that that replacement match the existing window size, proportions, and mutton pattern and trim. What would not be recommended by an HPC or be flagged at the very least as a concern would be the loss of proportions of that window. So you're changing the size and the rhythm, the mutton profiles, and the opening size. That would also go through a review path and be considered a major application when you're doing window replacement. So this is just a quick graphic to help explain what I mean by muntins and everything. So as you can see, there are a lot of different window types, and they play a huge role in the appearance of the building, and those would be reviewed on what would be proposed. And as you can see to the left, the muntin size and the material, there are differences between the historic wooden windows, but there are contemporary ways that you can retain that character of it, and even upgrade the window to have the double panes for, energy savings and preventing more heat loss, but it can still, be respectful to that original historic window type. What would probably be considered incompatible, as seen here on the far left, or inappropriate, would be the kind of vinyl complete replacement that changes that character of the window. The second type I'm going to just quickly go through is an example of a roof replacement. This is often eligible for minor review and would focus on compatible materials, color profile, and any visible details of that roof. So what is always recommended is to use compatible roofing materials to what is existing now and to preserve the historic roof's forms, like dormers or cornices and the trim. So for example, if you live in a historic house and originally that house had slate roof tiles, but currently it's something more contemporary like asphalt, you would not be asked to go back to the slate roofing material from before. It would be acceptable to replace it in kind with asphalt material because that is what it currently is when the building was included as in the historic district. Now, alternatively, what would not be recommended is if you were doing the reverse and you had a slate roof from the 1880s, because there are still many that exist, and you wanted to change that to a completely different material. That would probably not be approved in an HPC review because it would be drastically changing the character of that roof. So as I just discussed, these are some of those examples of historic roof materials. The one on the far left is a photo of wood shingles. There were a few that we saw with beautiful wood shingle roofs. If those materials are still existing, it would be recommended to replace with the same in-kind material. Non-historical materials are, of course, composites and asphalt, but as Stephen just mentioned, because the development of these materials has progressed so much, it has now been allowed for composite roof materials to sometimes go in place of some of the historic roof materials because they do look so similar and they can behave in similar ways if properly detailed. Okay, the last example is the biggest one. If someone wants to do an addition on a property in the historic district, these are not prohibited outright and would have to go through a major application review. The preferred location would be on secondary elevations or at the rear of the building where it is not as visible or as impactful from the streetscape on the historic architecture. So the preference and the recommendation of an HPC is to keep those additions as subordinate to the existing house in scale, height, and massing. Additionally, it's recommended that that addition use compatible materials to what the roofing forms are, the windows, and the exterior cladding. It's not recommended that an addition overwhelm or obscure the existing house. This also means that it would create issues of scale, massing, and have an impact that would be considered negative or not compatible from the street. So as a graphic of examples of what would typically be approved and what would be denied or go back out for a further review process and consideration, these are examples, right? So the two green they're compatible, they're subordinate to the main structure, whereas the examples in red, of course, are significant changes that would have a negative impact on the historic character of that building. Sorry? Maybe like the ballroom of our Capitol. I don't think that one would have been approved if they went through the process. So the next steps in this, because those are just quick overviews, where we are. Stephen, I think we'll continue to talk through this, but as mentioned, this is an informational meeting, the second one of its type. And so the decision on whether or not to create a district is still under review, and the township committees will be considering this in the application in the future. So Stephen will walk through exactly what that is as a recap also.
We're almost at the end, don't worry. I get to do all the boring stuff. So the process to nominate a historic district in Maplewood is lengthy, because it's spelled out in the ordinance, and it prioritizes public meetings, public input. There's multiple steps along the way, and we're not even within the formal ordinance defined process. Like Isabel said, this is all still informal community information sessions. So the first formal step in the process will be what's called a nomination proposal. This is a summary document outlining the potential historic district and at a very high level, just explaining its historic significance. The second step, upon receipt of that nomination proposal and approval to commission a nomination report, is when the HPC takes receipt of a nomination report. The nomination report is like a more detailed version of the nomination proposal. It will lean heavily on the 2006 survey of Ridgewood Road of that district. And the HPC will hold another hearing to consider that. And if that is approved and referred up to the township committee, It is introduced by them. This is now the third formal public meeting in the process. And they send it to the planning board to review consistency with the township's master plan at the fourth public meeting. And then after that, it goes back to the township committee for a fifth public meeting. And that would be the point at which the district ordinance is adopted. So there are a minimum of 5 public meetings during the course of the process. Just for context, there are many communities throughout Essex County that have very great historic preservation commissions and thriving historic districts, from Glen Ridge to West Orange to Milburn. I'm sure many people recognize these neighborhoods: Short Hills Park, Llewellyn Park, Upper Montclair, 95% of Glen Ridge. This is kind of a, where's where of very desirable places to live in Essex County. And historic preservation, I think, has a good deal to do with that. Like we discussed back in December, I have a bit of firsthand experience in Glen Ridge, and I think this is somewhat common from the other historic preservation commissions I've looked at in Essex County. In about 9 of 10 applications, or in the case of Glen Ridge, even higher than that, they take receipt of an application and they approve it. The approval rate in Glen Ridge exceeds 90%, and that's typical for most other historic preservation commissions in Essex County within the past couple of years. These are your neighbors, they're volunteers, they want to find a solution so that you can continue to live in your house and make it work for your family. I'm going to answer a couple common questions that people may have, and then we'll go to any other questions that people have right after this. The first one is, will I be forced to restore my house to an earlier appearance? The answer to that is no. The Historic Preservation Commission will not be pushing people back to how their house appeared in the late 1800s or early 1900s. That's not consistent with contemporary historic preservation practice. It's about rehabilitating, adaptively reusing, and making your home functional for today and tomorrow. Many houses, I'll also just add, within the Ridgewood Road potential district have had additions and substantial work done to them in the past, and that's part of the beauty of an evolving neighborhood. Will I not be able to renovate or add on to my house? The answer to that is, will I not be, I wrote this in a kind of confusing way. Will I not be able to renovate or add on to my house? The answer to that one is no. No. Does this change the underlying zone? It does not. Is there an expedited process for reviewing minor work? Yes, we talked about that. The email process, and you should get an answer within a day or two, certainly within 2 weeks. And the last question, are all demolitions in the potential district banned? The answer to that is no. So just again, the answer to the second question is also no. On demolitions, if you submit an application for demolition to the Historic Preservation Commission, and after a hearing, they deny that demolition, it is not forever denied. You begin a process of about, I think, a year, where you're supposed to be seeking out alternatives to that demolition. And after that year process, if you're satisfied with the ordinance says, potential alternatives to the demolition, you will in fact be able to still demolish the property if you so choose to. So it is not, certainly this is not an absolute ban on demolition. So a couple pictures, just to wrap up here, of some of the homes that we associate with our, the neighborhood in Ridgewood Road. These are some of Maplewood's real gems when it comes to architecture. I think Isabel and I find it very fascinating every time we go to walk down the street, and we take so many pictures of it. You've probably seen us in front of your houses. The real goal here for a potential local historic district is to prevent the undue and inappropriate loss of these historic structures. I mean, we can all begin to imagine just what losing one or two of these 150 some odd properties would mean to the look and feel of walking down Ridgewood Road. So with that, I will take any questions that people have, and we will start, if I could, with anyone that's here in person. And I think Isabel, if you could just run out to them with the microphone, and then we will also take some questions that people have been writing in on Zoom, and then we will also, if someone wants to say anything off of Zoom, we'll go to them as well. So just a moment here while we find anyone with a question here in the room in person. Yes. And again, if you have a specific question about your property, I can certainly answer that after. General questions would be best though.
I have a few questions. Can we use this amount?
Maybe one at a time.
What about the trees? We had a bush history where somebody had like a massive old growth tree on a property, and they were trying to get the neighbors not to just immediately cut that down. Is this that at all or no?
I don't believe so, and I think Maplewood has some type of shade tree commission, possibly, maybe not yet, okay. The primary goal of this historic district effort is really about the houses.
If people submit a proposal, they want to do whatever it is they say they were going to do completely, and then they do something different from what they said they were going to do, is there a penalty?
Yeah.
What happens? And who's like watching the story?
It's a similar process, if everybody could hear that. There was a question about penalties related to non-compliance with what the HPC tells you. It's similar to penalties that you would receive for doing stuff different than your building permit says, doing stuff different than what the zoning board or planning board approved. There's a process in the ordinance, there's penalties, and it's, I believe, up to the construction code official who would go to close the permits at the end of the day to confirm that things were built according to plans.
I find that most of the time it's a risk slap. It's one of those like, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to get permission situation. And then the last one was regarding, the retention of like, not just the material, but the colors or whatever. So supposing that house has already been renovated in some way, you're not going to require it. So you could have like, I don't know, like a yellow roof. It doesn't belong in the first place. Like if you want to bring it back to something else, but you're not going to say, oh, bring the yellows back, you have to leave it that way.
No, the HPC is just there to react to what's within the scope of your project. So if someone had a magenta colored roof on their house, but they're replacing their front door, and that's the scope of the project, the HPC is just reacting to the scope of the work. They're not there to compel you to do additional work. But if you're looking to modify that magenta colored roof, they would look for that to be done in a more appropriate manner, consistent with the historic district. And that's not going back to wood shake or slate roof tiles. It's probably simply just putting an asphalt shingle roof on there, like a gray or black color, like practically everyone has. Thank you for those questions. Any other questions from the audience here? I'm going to start skipping a few of these. Yep.
I remember a couple of years ago, they were restoring the Long Island district, and I was doing the status of that is.
I don't have any update on that status.
Survey.
So it sounds like Gulf Island was surveyed, similar to how Ridgewood Road was surveyed. And there's other parts of Maplewood that have already been surveyed.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions and
also some comments. They'll go one after the other. A lot of these reviews usually add costs for homeowners as much as we were shown that composite materials we should repair. I'm a general contractor in New York City. We work a lot on historic buildings. We have the Landmark Preservation Commission there. Any time any project has an LPC review, the time, the uncertainty, and the cost of that specific project goes up. There are very few companies that are willing to take up those sort of jobs, especially when it comes to things like windows. When I was trying to replace the windows in Maplewood for my house, we reached out to Gilbert Anderson, and the first question they asked was, is it a historic house? Because they don't deal with that. So they're not the common company that deals with windows now. You go, if we get this designation, we can't use the windows anymore. We have to get more bespoke companies. And it will become very expensive, I feel. That's how it is in other places where it is. Now, if it does become expensive, obviously the benefits to all of this that are collected, we get a wonderful neighborhood. But is the township willing to subsidize perhaps our taxes? Is that something that's been looked at? Because the cost is on the bottom, which is where we have the preservation right now in the village. Those are commercial properties, they're rented, the cost of maintaining them higher, but then those owners can also raise the rent to raise the price of the community in there. So, are there any benefits that the township is looking to give us out of this?
So the question, just for those on Zoom that couldn't hear, was, is the township looking into mitigating the potential costs of being within a local historic district? I'm not aware of that at this point. I think that's something the township committee could certainly look into. If the application fees as they relate to the Historic Preservation Commission are presently very low or none. None. So there are different steps that the township can do to lessen, the administrative burden, let's say, associated with the historic district. On the nature of costs as it relates to windows, I think there's short-term and long-term costs that can be considered. You can go find windows that'll last 10 years, or there's windows available that last 40 or 50 years. I'm not saying that the HPC will only be approving windows that will last 40 or 50 years. What I'm saying is that with the new guidance from the Secretary of the Interiors, and just where the market is at today, I think homeowners with historic homes have a dozen different options from different manufacturers to find appropriate windows at a range of price points that fit their budget. I agree with you that the least expensive window available tonight at the Union Home Depot is probably not appropriate for a historic district, but I think there's something maybe just above that that still has the mutton pattern that the home either once had or appropriately should have. So I think there's a lot of options out there. Doesn't always need to be wood windows. There's plenty of composites on the market that are perfectly suitable, and to many people you can't even tell that they're not wood from the street. Did I answer all your questions there, or did you have a follow-up?
I had one more question.
Sure.
Which was also a comment whereby the very last slide where we had the historic homes and then the slide without the historic homes. Within the last 20 years, we've had, I think, 3 houses that have gone like this on Ridgewood Road. So it's not that we're facing such a devastating overdevelopment situation. What I do feel is, like, many people may know what's happening to one Ridgewood. Those who are familiar with it, things the Metro brothers, they're trying to get rid of that property. build a two-family, build two separate houses there. I understand that sort of stuff needs to be prevented, but I don't think the way to do it is with this. There should be other regulations, zoning regulations, because Lefter Brothers may do it today, they'll get away with it, but we'll be stuck with this. And we'll have to go through all those processes for our windows and budgets and roofs. You know, there should be other ways. Soon the state will be coming in, changing in zoning. And I think what we're trying to do is on the front run the state and put in these regulations to prevent properties from coming down, to prevent the state from interfering with zoning. But then this is sort of just sugarcoating it. In reality, we are preventing development, you know. So I do feel that other means to do it, not this designation.
Thank you for your comment on that. Were there any other questions from the audience here tonight? Yes.
I was just curious, what the experience has been with other communities with solar panels? Are people adding solar panels in historic preservation areas, or is that just a non-starter, or like ways to do it with certain types of ones, and just a space for that there?
So the question for those on Zoom that couldn't hear it is related to whether or not solar panels can be accommodated within a potential historic district. The answer is yes. Maybe not on the front gable of a slate roofed house, but certainly on the back side. Many side gable conditions can accommodate solar panels. Comes up somewhat frequently in Glen Ridge, and I can tell you that they are approved there. Typically, the threshold question is whether or not they are fully visible or minimally visible, or even not visible. They're not visible, the HPC is not looking at them. But in many cases, on a non-historic roof, minimally visible solar panels can certainly be installed.
Thank you.
And there are products out there like solar shingles, if those still exist, that maybe can go in even more visible places if they look like the historic or existing roofing. Sure, any other questions from the audience? Okay, we'll have a moment. Oh, yes. But I love questions.
I just wanted to get a sense for how do we measure, is this something that if we would once, what information do you use to say, you know what, designating Ridgewood Road is in the best interest of Maplewood? Is the township committee on board? Where do we get the authority to make these decisions? And why do people think it's a good idea?
So the authority to designate districts or sites in New Jersey comes from the same authority that allows you to have a historic preservation commission to the municipal land use law. And that's what the other 150 or 200 towns have used to set up their HPCs and designate sites and landmarks. It's the same authority that allows the town to zone different parts of the town for different uses, that allows you to have a planning board, an environmental commission, all those different things flow from the MLUL. During the course of this initiative towards adoption, there are at least 2 meetings that the township committee will have to discuss and consider the potential designation. And it would be at that time conceivably that they would, make their thoughts known. And if you have concerns or you're in support of the potential designation, I would recommend that you certainly talk to the township committee members who are the ultimate ones making this decision.
And as a follow-up, I sort of echo this gentleman's comment over here, which is effectively the designation of a subset of Maplewood is asking private homeowners to finance a public good. So like, I don't ask my neighbors over in Hilton to pay my pool mortgage. So why should we pay for them to have the privilege of a historic district in part of the town?
I think if you're living within the historic district, you would also be benefiting from, you know, the elevated ambiance that comes with the historic district.
But I'm just not convinced that there's widespread interest in this designation or in the HPC at all. I think that there are a few very passionate individuals who are doing this work, but I am not convinced that if I ask my neighbors over at Hilton to say, will you pay for my home membership? They wouldn't want to do it. So why am I paying for them to have the privilege of having historic homes in the town? And bearing the burden.
And just to follow up to, I mean, I think part of this comes from, we are all seeing houses torn down in by New Hampshire. The master plan is supposed to be based on equity, so why not have zoning that applies to all of them and not sectioning off this group or that? You can have the same zoning rules, regulations that are just scale, that are just tear down, demolition, that work for the entire town are enforced for the entire town. So that responsibility is spread fairly.
The most effective way to prevent or mitigate the loss of historic buildings, actual surveyed historic buildings though, is through a historic preservation commission and a historic district. The zoning board and planning board aren't really supposed to consider the historic nature or value of the, you know, if a house is associated, if a demolition of a house is associated with a subdivision or a zoning variance, they don't really look at, because they're also not really trained and qualified to look at the degree to which it's either a historic resource to the township or not.
It also goes the other way, and the historic preservation board is not in the planning commission, right? So these are separate things. We're getting a little bit mixed because an HPC can review a demolition of a historically significant structure, right? That significance of the structure, it can't be made up. You can't just decide you want the home to be significant. That's why we're only considering the properties to be in this district that have been reviewed in 2006 for their significance or not. Now, there are different designations within that survey. So some properties are not historically significant, and I don't know if we actually touched on this tonight. They would just be considered as contributing, but they would be under less constraint than an actually historically significant project.
The non-historic houses would be considered non-contributing, and that's according to the survey. So that's available online. There's a list of all these properties and whether they were classified as contributing, so contributing to the historic character of the district, or non-contributing.
Now, to also be a little bit more clear on that, if a property is non-contributing, but it's still in the designated district, it is still a neighbor, it is part of that whole ambiance of the area. So it does still get reviewed by the HPC because it's your neighbor, it contributes to the entire streetscape. But it can't be held under the same specificity of the review for its historical significance. I understand that the demolition part of this, it walks the line between the zoning component and the historical component, but the other factors are really more about the character of the importance of the historic houses and all those there.
Okay, so next we're going to try and take some questions from those that are on Zoom. After one more question here, just a moment. And if you do have a question on Zoom, please raise your hand so that I can order this and people aren't talking over each other. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Just this is a comment. I understand the issue because the individual property, in isolation, being asked to be totality of the survey that's done, it does begin to feel like, of public value in general, right? And also just like in the zone, you barely zone an individual lot, you zone over an area in that fashion. So I get more comfortable when I see the district being larger, is what I'm saying. On the other hand, comments were brought up about equity across the town. And I'm kind of wondering if, and this, I'm not looking for a complete answer, but I'm wondering if that's ever really addressed in public policy sense, if there are past experiences, if there are, guiding principles, anything like that that says, because I don't quantify that, frankly. I don't really understand how, these, in our case, the east and west side of the town, there's some sort of issue of equity or taxpayer dollars being transferred to the election of the other. Is there anything that would inform us on the extent of which that's going on?
So the story map that we've put together for the project, which I'll have another link to at the end of this deck, if you haven't seen it already, has a couple different studies linked that have been done, two of them specifically in New Jersey, on the economic impacts of historic district designation, and one of them was looking more nationwide. And I think it does address some of your questions related to equity and how this actually rolls out longer term in an economic sense as well.
Check these references. Thanks.
Okay, so we can come back to if anyone has any other questions in the room in just a moment, but so far on Zoom, David has raised his hand. So David, if you'd like to come off mute, I hope the audio works. Could you just try speaking?
Yes, are you able to hear me?
I am.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate, Stephen, the active effort to accommodate my being able to speak tonight, given that I'm assuming best intentions, this meeting is the day after a 3-day federal holiday weekend. So I'm on vacation, pre-planned from my hotel room, so apologies if my connection is weak, and I appreciate everybody's effort in making this happen. Would like to say good evening to my neighbors and to the ladies and gentlemen on the Historic Preservation Commission. I am going to repeat some of the comments that I made at the Historic Preservation meeting last week, because I want my neighbors to know that they're not alone when they have important questions about equity, cost, and the unreasonableness of this proposal. I live at 506 Ridgewood Road. I am in the impacted district. I noticed in some of the surveys from the fall that some of the proponents were not, in fact, in the district. So thank you, Stephen, for posting that. I reviewed it. I want to be very, very clear. I oppose this deeply. It's deeply personal. The designation is going to deeply impact me as a homeowner, going to make it more difficult to own and maintain my home, and it's not fair. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to my neighbors. I've owned my home for 3 years. That doesn't seem like a long time, but I'm not new to Maplewood. I grew up here. I attended public schools. I graduated from Columbia High School. I have a deep connection to the community. I don't know who's in the room. Maybe some of you know me. Maybe some of you don't, but it's nice to meet you all. I care about my neighbors. I care about my house and maintaining my house, but I also care about autonomy and cost and reasonable expectations. And this proposal is going to create a situation that violates those normal home ownership principles that have existed in Maplewood for my entire life, and frankly, since the township was founded. As a matter of policy, I think this is arbitrary and inequitable. I see people in the chat saying inequitable. It's a little hard to hear in the room, but I've heard inequitable come up a few times. Age alone does not make a home historic. My house is about the same age as everybody else's house, a block off of Ridgewood, 3 blocks off of Ridgewood, on the other side of town. They're old. The whole town is old. Singling out 1.7% of the homeowners or a higher regulatory burden because they fall inside an arbitrary proposed boundary for a survey that is 20 years old and has not been updated is not a fair preservation policy. It is a tax. It will make repairs, renovations, maintenance, resale, insurance, contractor work more expensive, more uncertain, and it will impose a financial burden on only a small selected group of residents. We already pay significant taxes in Maplewood. We all know this. This will make it more expensive. There are families within the 137 homes who have stretched themselves to buy their houses and pay their mortgages. There are families who are retired and have fixed budgets and do not have time or the wherewithal to pick out an expensive window when they need to replace a rotting window. And frankly, it is nobody's decision other than their own, as long as it meets the building code. We are already subject to zoning requirements. I live in an R7 district. That comes with restrictions on what I can and can't do with my house. The town already has the power to review permits, building plans, and land use and make a determination if that is appropriate within the R7 zone. It's always been that way. And that's one of the reasons why it's been so well preserved, because it's zoned. The reason these houses exist is because there's already rules. My concerns are not abstract with respect to my time and my neighbor's time. We've already seen well-intentioned local rules become cumbersome in practice. We have a tree permitting process that makes it very, very difficult to take down even a dead tree. It requires multiple trips and phone calls to the sanitation department. This is a similar cumbersome process for things like changing a simple window or replacing some trim or replacing a roof, which are mandatory maintenance requirements of homeownership. This is my family's actual home. I actually live there, and it's my largest single investment. And I care very much about the house. But the township seems very, very concerned about what 1.7% of the community can do in their house, when we were far less concerned last summer when a movie company parked a tractor trailer in front of my daughter's bedroom and ran it for 18 hours a day with a diesel generator. It's galling. It's very, very inconsistent. And I think my neighbors need to hear that. I am a no. I think there are other people in the room who are a no. I'm happy to engage in a meaningful dialogue about this, but I'm, as you can hear from my voice, very, very upset about the prospect of somebody imposing their will on my ability to make reasonable decisions about my house. I'm a responsible homeowner. I'm invested in the community, and I have the capacity to make decisions for myself and for my family within the existing rules. So I would respectfully hope that these comments become part of the record. I was unable to attend the meeting last fall. I was not aware of it. I've just become aware of this now, but these concerns need to make it into the record. This is a consulting report that will be generated and shared with the Historic Commission and with the town council. This needs to get into the record. There are other people who feel the same way, and we need to build a consensus to push back on this because this is an imposition on our homes. So I appreciate your time. It's an equity issue. If there's anybody in the room who has a position of authority to make a decision, whether it be the Historic Preservation Commission or somebody from the town council to speak to how we would offset the costs, for instance, a tax abatement for the people in this district, I would be open to hearing it because there is a significant equity problem here, and it's very concerning. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. If anybody wants to contact me, I'm at 506 Ridgewood Road. I'm happy to chat. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Was there anyone else on Zoom that had a question? I'm going to read one question I see here from Marilyn. If you do have a question, then please raise your hand. One question I see here from Marilyn is, has the commission researched real examples of the repair costs they have deemed appropriate versus inappropriate, such as slate roof costs versus asphalt, to get a sense of the scale of the price increase caused by these regulations? Can the community included in the plan afford this? Again, that's a question from Marilyn. Has the HPC done a comprehensive economic analysis? No, that's not what historic preservation commissions do. I will tell you that there should not really be a situation though where someone is in a situation where they have an asphalt shingle roof, where they're being told that only a slate roof would be approved. That's not at all a situation that would come up with the Historic Preservation Commission. If you have an existing slate roof, like I think less than 2 or 3 houses in this potential district do have, and you're looking to replace that slate roof, the HPC would very much hope that at least the front street-facing portion of that roof is maintained as genuine slate material, or that you're looking at a very good simulated slate product that could be considered. But if you have an asphalt shingle roof, like 95% of the district, you can put a new asphalt shingle roof on, no problem. Does anyone else in the audience have any other questions? Yes. Could I join the group one?
Why does this have to be a district? Why not designate individual properties for, let individual homeowners who don't want this opt out? If for the record, I'm also against it.
Thank you. So the question for those that couldn't hear on Zoom is, why is a district being considered for designation and not just individual sites? The Ridgewood Road potential district already has, I think, at least two individually designated sites, the Thomas Fall House and the Duran Headed House. Historic districts work best when they're based on an objective survey, like was done for the Ridgewood Road district, and it's done at a community neighborhood scale as opposed to just a few episodic houses. I think you can look at numerous examples all over New Jersey, like the ones I mentioned in Essex County that have successful historic districts. And I would also just add that as part of this project, we are looking to update a couple of the surveys that were done in 2006 that have had major alterations, or in some cases demolition, occur. Those are going to be updated before the nomination report is submitted. So that is part of this, to make sure the township committee is looking at the most accurate information that they have.
You didn't answer the question. Why can't individual homeowners opt out? Right? Or why not designate the truly historic, meaningful properties in the residency? If they did that, we would have opt out. Honestly, it's a house that we should want. And we have to do it. If we would, but the problem. But our city is so bad. We own the housing. Thankfully, it's a law. We are living on the vision. I think we're experienced and because we simply using executives. A number of OCC, gravity, not consistently all the law. I'm sure it's a law. But this was my experience all along with nothing else. And we have been, I believe, on this similar part of the I think let's have the same rules applied for all of them. Everyone can be the same. Historically, and you see from how it is, which also we have to talk with some wants. If there's anybody competitive, I need to about that. Sorry,
No problem. So the question was about individual homeowners opting out of a potential district, and I think sound community planning is based on, expert research done. This was not done by me, by the way. I'm not just saying that. This is sound planning, reasons why not only a dozen properties that are key contributing are really significant to Maplewood, but why the collection of all 130, 140 some odd houses together comprise a very particular, and in this case, very long history of Maplewood's development. And I think it's a similar discussion that we've had in Glen Ridge in the three subsequent expansions of the historic district there, that in many of those streets, you can't necessarily pin down one or two really significant houses, but when you see all the block, a dozen houses together, or 1,400 houses, it really begins to mean something, and it is an important part, I think, of Maplewood's history that we have here on Ridgewood Road documented in the survey. A question?
Here is others, and you know, I love Ridgewood Road, and one reason that I'm interested in this district is because I think it's, I mean, those who are homes would qualify, like your home does, to be completely landlord, because we're not gonna reach that threshold. There's very few homes that would. And I think the downside, even if one home was eligible for that, would be that you're probably experiencing, you're not getting a lot of the benefits that a historic district can offer. Because we were talking about, you know, homes across the street that you're impacted by, right? You experience that firsthand, and you're not reaping the benefits of what you would with the district. So actually, you know, I would hope that this district process would be helpful for those who are already in the landmark to get the benefits of having your neighbors join you in that. And it's a collective good, right? The history of historic preservation and historic districting, anyone familiar with Jane Jacobs and Greenwich Village, this all started as a community effort and grassroots effort for the community to have a voice. Because we have our planning board, we have our zoning board, and we don't have a voice in this. A lot of times we don't get to have a say in how our community changes and evolves over time. What this tool does is it actually gives the community a voice, right? And we can have a say in how we want to manage the change in the road. And why Ridgewood Road? Because it really tells, like, it's about what I'm saying is it tells the whole story of Maplewood. So if the whole rest of the township was torn down, or substantially altered where it was unrecognizable, and that I think we're all seeing a lot of change happen in the community. I've been here 7 years, and you know, and a lot of it's been, some of it's been mitigated, but there's still a ton of change coming, and we're not going to stop that. But it's about giving us a voice and having, as residents of the neighborhood in a shared street, being able to be part of, you know, have a voice.
So I think the consternation is that the homeowners don't actually have a voice. It's the committee, right, or the commission, sorry, and those folks will. So we don't have a say, who sits on the commission, and the homeowners don't actually get to make the decisions, the commission is the one that makes the decision. So you're not empowering homeowners.
Right. You want to buy there. You want to volunteer, and the goal is to get, if this district goes through, was us to have members of the commission be from the community, and everybody, you know, because then they're gonna understand as a homeowner what we're being asked to do, and they can help communicate that to the rest of the commission. Not every member is gonna be a member of the neighborhood, right? But there can be some representation, and it allows them to be, they're gonna be design guidelines. So now there's a Department of Integrated Standards, if there's nothing to stop us from doing more specific design guidelines, let's speak directly to our neighborhood. And that's another role that I think the commission has, is to work towards that.
Thank you, thank you. Is it?
I disagree with that, because how can 9 community members tell all of us that we're 100 I want to do with our windows? I mean, we should have our own rights, but we do our windows, our houses.
I don't think Mr. Guys was saying is, you know, that's the decision if the community decides in favor of historic district. It's the decision that it should have that set of values posted on it. I would say that's the same thing as any planning commission deciding how land use is used. These are your community representatives that have been voted in to make. Sorry. Maybe I may not know exactly how they, because I do think this conversation is very positive.
The final decision is not the Historic Preservation Commission. All we are doing as a Preservation Commission is nominating a site or site or district. The final decision is a township committee. It is not our doing. We are not taking your rights away. It is the township committee that makes the final determination. You do not have that ability.
Thank you. Does anyone else who hasn't asked a question yet?
We're nominating. We can nominate, anybody can nominate any building in this town for designation. You don't have to own it. It could be your neighbors, it could be someone on the other side of town. Nominate for designation, that has to be researched and submitted for nomination. Anybody can do that. That's free.
My
Thank you.
I have to respond to that briefly. So to suggest that the decision lies with town council when it's clear that the Historic Preservation Commission is driving this through is a bit dismissive. You could stop. You've decided, principally because there's a 20-year-old report and it's convenient, to proceed in this manner. You could stop, but you're not planning to. So that's a bit cute. I'll be quiet, but that's a bit cute.
Does anyone else who hasn't had the opportunity to ask a question have one? Okay.
I want to say one more piece of information. We are focused on the Ridgewood Road District nomination because the HPC does intend to nominate it. I will also point out that in the 2025 master plan, in their historic preservation section that is published, or about to be passed. I don't know if
It's adopted.
there are other districts in Maplewood that have been identified and are in support of according to the master plan of the township. Ridgewood Road is one of those. So, I think that touches on a couple of points of questions of like why only this part of the district. There have been other historic significant areas in Maplewood identified with different periods of significance, different reasons behind. Some of those have surveys, as Stephen has mentioned, other ones have not been surveyed. And I do want to just share that information as well, because I think it relates to the process and to planning on the whole, and who's involved with it, because it is not only, an isolated moment in 2006, it has also been revisited prior township to the last year.
Okay, so we will have the historic preservation element of the master plan and the 2006 survey available in the back table there. If you'd like to take a look at the hard copy, it's available online as well. And the last thing I'll just mention is that there's white feedback surveys on each table. If you have a moment, please do fill those out. We collect them. They do become part of the public record in support or opposed to the potential historic district. And please drop those on the back table on your way out. The yellow colored paper, the frequently asked questions, is yours to keep for reference. And lastly, if you're on Zoom, there is a virtual survey that you could fill out. That would be great to get everyone's feedback there as well. And if you would like to take a look at the story map, the QR code is on the screen, and there is a link to it as well. That's a clearinghouse for all things related to this particular